Alexander the Great. He embarked from Macedonia and journeyed all the way to India, not losing a single battle. His objective was to find the edge of the world. But here's a twist. He passed away at the tender age of 32. And here's something that'll really get you thinking. Upon his death, his body didn't decompose for a week. This sparked myths of his divine descent. But could there be a scientific explanation for this phenomenon? People of that era explained this astonishing situation by stating that Alexander was a ruler who descended from the gods. But let's ponder this. Was this truly the case? Or brace yourselves. Could Alexander the Great have been buried alive? In the east, where the expansive Persian Empire governed nearly all of the known world, and in the west, where the once magnificent ancient Greek states had lost their grandeur and submitted to the Persians, Alexander was born into such a world in 356 BC in Pella. His father was King Philip II of Macedonia. To say that he received a quality education in his childhood would be an understatement. His tutor was none other than Aristotle. At the age of 16, his education concluded, and he began to fight alongside his father against the Greek and Balkan nations. However, while King Philip II was marrying another woman, a dispute between father and son resulted in King Philip falling to the ground. His son Alexander remarked, "This man, who was preparing to cross from Europe to Asia, fell while moving from one chair to another and was exiled by his father." The untimely death of King Philip II, however, left lingering suspicions. Was Alexander somehow involved? This is something historians still debate. After 6 months, he was pardoned and returned, but the assassination of his father left a question mark in people's minds, making them wonder if Alexander was behind it. Following the unexpected death of his father, Alexander was proclaimed King of Macedonia at the age of 20. His dream was to march east from the very beginning, but to achieve this, he first had to establish his authority in the region. Perceiving the young Alexander as immature and incompetent, the people of the region revolted. Within 2 years, Alexander dealt with more than 10 revolts in the Balkan and Greek states, suppressing these revolts brutally, showing no mercy in any of them. When the calendar showed the year 334 BC, he fulfilled his greatest dream. He set out with his army to reach the end of the world. Alexander's army included phalanx troops with long spears inherited from his father, Thessalian cavalry, Rhodian slingers, and Cretan archers, all of whom were well equipped and diverse in terms of weaponry for the time. The advancing Macedonian army encountered the Persian army in the territory of present-day Çanakkale. Persian King Darius III, who was in Babylon at the time, certainly did not anticipate such an attack. As a result, the Persians were caught unprepared with a small force of 30,000 men against Alexander's 37,000. The Macedonians won the Battle of Granicus, a significant victory. After the battle, Alexander rode his horse to the Aegean coast and liberated ancient Greek cities such as Ephesus and Didyma from the Persians. Although his victory was minor, his territorial gains were significant, and the Persians retreated, leaving half of Anatolia to Alexander. However, Alexander the Great had no intention of stopping. After liberating Western Anatolia from the Persians, he continued to move eastwards. Persian King Darius III recognized the gravity of the situation and came from Babylon himself, waiting for Alexander with his army of 100,000 men. Alexander's army could only reach 40,000 with the reinforcements he made in Anatolia. In the Battle of Issu, the outcome of the war did not change again. 5 Persian generals commanding the Persian army lost their lives on the battlefield. Persian King Darius even abandoned his family on the battlefield and fled, while the loss of the Macedonian army was 7,000. 20,000 people from Persia lost their lives. After this war, Alexander the Great turned his attention to Egypt. The Macedonian leader, who annexed defenseless Egypt to his territories, was welcomed as a savior and declared pharaoh. A renowned oracle in the city of Siwa even proclaimed that Alexander the Great was the son of Zeus, one of the Greek gods. The Macedonians and Greeks, on the other hand, claimed that Alexander was a descendant of Hercules due to his accomplishments. In short, Alexander the Great had attained a divine status in the eyes of the people. After residing in Egypt for a while, Alexander the Great set out to deliver the final blow to the Persian Empire. This battle would be a matter of life and death for King Darius III of Persia. Thus, the Persians assembled a massive army of nearly 200,000. Alexander embarked with 50,000 men. The two armies confronted each other in what is now Iraqi territory. In a display of unparalleled bravery, Alexander the Great crossed the Persian lines with his guard unit, consisting of cavalry, and launched a daring attack on Darius at the center. Confronted with death, Darius was terrified and fled, leaving his army leaderless, and the Persians were once again defeated. After the Battle of Gaugamela, Persia never recovered and vanished from the stage of history. King Darius was betrayed and killed by his own soldiers. The fall of Persia did not mean that Alexander would stop. His goal was to march on until he found the end of the world. So he continued his eastward march across the Hindu Kush Mountains and conquered a significant portion of Indian territory. Almost 10 years had passed since Alexander and his soldiers set out from Macedonia. They had fought more than 50 battles and traveled more than 10,000 miles. The Macedonian and Greek soldiers were exhausted and worn out after so many battles, and yearned for home and family. The fact that Alexander still had no intention of returning put him at odds with his troops, and revolts broke out. Moreover, Alexander's marriages to Persian women and his appointment of Persians as governors caused a great deal of discontent in the Western world. Additionally, Alexander had sent 30,000 Persian youths to Macedonia for education. When they returned, the fact that these individuals were given important administrative positions in the state sparked anger against Alexander. In other words, Alexander the Great was no longer as popular a ruler as before. As a result of the soldiers' pressure, Alexander returned to Babylon with his army to take a breather and stayed there. After a brief rest, he planned to organize a campaign on the Arabian Peninsula. However, in May 323 BC, historical sources write that he began to feel unwell before a banquet, but Alexander still attended the banquet and drank nearly 10 liters of wine that night. The great warrior began to suffer from fever and severe pains the following morning. He even lost his ability to move and became unable to get out of bed. Although he was fully conscious, on the 8th day of his illness, he could not move his body, but could blink his eyes. On the 11th day, the doctors realized that Alexander the Great, who was seen as a god, had stopped breathing at the age of 32. Thus, Alexander the Great had lost his life. The cause of Alexander the Great's death has always remained a mystery in history. Historians speculated that his enemies poisoned him, or that he may have been afflicted by diseases such as typhoid, malaria, or excessive alcohol consumption. But as a result of new developments in the world of science, an interesting claim was made. After Alexander the Great died, his body was first taken to Egypt and placed in a coffin and displayed there for a while. That is, his body was not buried for nearly a week. Historians of the period wrote that Alexander's body did not decompose during this period, and even his body temperature did not drop significantly, proving that he was a god. According to new research and claims, Alexander the Great had Guillain-Barré syndrome, a disease that affects the nervous system and paralyzes people. Due to this disease, he gradually became paralyzed, but he always remained conscious. In addition, in ancient times, doctors didn't check whether the patient was alive or not with a pulse. They checked whether he was breathing or not. As the lungs shrunk and contracted, breathing would decrease imperceptibly in this disease. According to today's medical understanding, the fact that his body did not deteriorate for 1 week and his body temperature did not decrease proves that Alexander was alive until the moment that he was buried. So perhaps this great leader who left his mark on the world could perceive everything around him while being put in the grave, but could not prevent what was happening. Who knows? Maybe Alexander the Great was buried alive in the grave.